Hi, all. Welcome. I'm Sophia Khan. I'm a senior customer success manager here at Everlaw. I work closely with law firms to ensure that they maximize the value of our platform, achieve their strategic goals, and maintain high levels of satisfaction by understanding their unique needs and challenges. And I've been at Everlaw for a little over 4 years. I wanted to thank you all for joining our session. Rob, Mark, thank you so much for being our wonderful panelists. You're all here to talk about the RFP process and how that can be complicated. So we wanted to share some stories from people that have already gone through it to help you on your next RFP. Rob and Mark's real world experiences will provide valuable insights into common challenges, successful strategies, and best practices by learning from their journey. Again, thank you both for your time to walk through what you've observed. I want to kick it over to Rob first for a quick introduction.
Sure. So, hello. I'm Rob Sawyer, IT Director of McDonald Carano. We're a Nevada-based law firm. We have two offices, one in Reno and Las Vegas, roughly 55 attorneys. We handle probably a dozen different practice areas across litigation and transactional. And I've been with the company for 23 years, and we're kind of a hybrid. Our IT department also handles a lot of the in-house litigation support, including a lot of Ediscovery and trial presentation type projects. And so I've been working in Ediscovery for most of that 23 years.
Wow.
And my name is Mark Thompson. I'm at Engstrom Lee. We're a Minneapolis-based plaintiff side law firm. We largely do ERISA class action litigation, as well as some litigation on behalf of unionized railroad workers. So our firm is a relatively new one, started back in June of 2022. And that was the time that we first were reaching out to and working with Everlaw, who we've worked with ever since.
Great. Awesome. Well, thank you both. So let's begin with our first question. And Rob, I'm going to start with you. What were some of the initial pain points you experienced that led you to identify a need for a new e-discovery software platform?
Sure, yeah. So this was about 7 years ago, 7 to 8 years ago. We had been using an on-premise e-discovery review system for many years, and we had numerous pain points. Our users were very unhappy. And here's an example of a few of them. It was very slow to review documents in our old system. You would click on a document and you'd have to wait, 5 seconds, sometimes longer to even see the document for it to resolve on screen, which, when you're reviewing tens of thousands of documents, that can really, really slow down the review. Our old system was difficult to access remotely. You had to VPN in, then you had to use Citrix, and there were just lots of technological bottlenecks that kind of disincentivized people from even wanting to review documents remotely, and a lot of times they would just come into the office. We were missing a ton of features that were starting to become common, like email threading and native Excel redacting, any kind of predictive coding or TAR 3.0 capabilities. It was really complicated to get data into the system. Uh, Everything was a separate process. OCRing the data was separate. Dedupe was a separate process, and it was pretty clunky. Just indexing the data so you could even search it was a whole process in and of itself. And I think I had even outlined at some point that the number of steps that were required to process native data into our old system, and it was 57 individual steps. And so it was a pain. It was very complicated. And finally, the production system was too unreliable. It crashed often. There were lots of errors. We were getting to the point to where we had to tell people to finish your review like a day or two in advance so that we had enough time to actually run the production, which is not an ideal situation. And it all came to a head late 2016. We had a huge production, very large, close to 100 gigs. I mean, it's even a large production by today's standards. There's maybe near 1 million documents, or at least 1 million pages. And we were running that production for 2 weeks, 24/7, and barely making a dent in it. And at some point, toward the end, we had to bring in another vendor just to get that production out the door on time and meet our deadline. And at that point, we knew, okay, we can't, these projects, the volume of VSI, the size of the productions are just going to keep growing and growing. We need something a lot more reliable and a lot more cutting edge to be able to do this. And so that's when we started looking at new systems. And so that's what led us to our process.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that. Mark, how about you?
I'd echo almost everything that was said there. And would maybe emphasize one thing and add a few others. The speed of document display and coding was maybe the biggest issue for lawyers at our firm relative to the system that we were using previously. That's just something that, as a small shop, our attorneys are going to be doing. It's unavoidable that a lot of their time is going to be spent looking at encoding docs. And we had problems on both scores with the previous system, both what Rob was describing with kind of delays in getting to the next document, but even in applying 2, 3, 4 codes to the same document, that was an additional delay each of those times. And when you're doing that after midnight some night, you just feel your mortality kind of encroaching. So Everlaw, speeding your way through a document production was absolutely critical. And then the other bucket for me is that as a smaller firm without someone who can handle e-discovery issues as close to their full-time job, we needed a platform that enabled the attorneys and paralegals to do relatively complex activities without consulting experts, which we just frankly don't have. And so that's relatively simple things like modifying a coding panel ourselves or creating complex custom searches. That's assigning documents to other attorneys to review. That's creating custom sets of documents for an expert to review, coding documents for a deposition, all the way down to the upload and production of documents. I think all of those things were activities that I required the assistance of a non-attorney e-discovery expert in the previous platform we were using, and they're now all things that I can personally accomplish, which is very meaningful to making sure our business is running.
That's amazing. Yeah, no, thank you for sharing that. So, Rob, this next one's for you. Your RFP process, from what I can recall, was quite extensive. Can you discuss what you were looking for in a potential vendor and how you ended up narrowing down your list?
Yeah, sure. So our process ended up being 9 months, and we broke it up into 3 phases, and we ended up evaluating 10 different vendors. And so that the first phase of this was we just did a lot of research. The timing ended up so that at the very beginning of this process, I could go to the ILTA conference. It was the summer of 2017. And I just went to all the booths that had any kind of e-discovery vendors and just got a sense of who the players were, what the modern features look like. It had been, almost a decade since we had last evaluated e-discovery systems, and so everything had changed, and I didn't even know what features were common. So we had to just do all that research, figure out what the features were, started making a list of vendors that seemed like we wanted to investigate further, and then we came up with our list of 10 vendors, and we spent probably 2 to 3 hours on each of those initial 10 vendors. So we talked to salespeople, we watched demos, we asked lots of questions, we started taking lots of notes, we got rough pricing on everything, and we just at this phase we started making a list of the features that we knew were important, that we cared about. That list ended up expanding to over 50 items. That we wanted to evaluate and make sure that all the systems that we were considering, we wanted to see how they handled those features. And if we could, we would get some hands-on, but importantly, during this first phase, it was just collecting as much information as possible, trying to get a sense of what the table stakes features are. What are the features that we absolutely cannot live without? What are features that we don't care about as much? What's a good sense of what the pricing is like with on-premises systems versus cloud systems? And so we went through that whole process, spent about 3 months doing it. And then at the end of that first phase, we ended up eliminating 5 systems from contention. And we eliminated some of them because of the pricing was just too extreme. Or maybe they were missing really critical features, or the implementation was just not substantial enough for us to really consider further. And so we ended that first phase with 5 vendors that we were going to look into much more in depth. And then we started our second phase. And so our second phase also ended up consisting of about 3 months. And I'll just mention that this whole process, we were making it up as we went along. We had never done this intensive a process for software evaluation before. And so we were just trying to, we knew this was important that we get it right. So we tried to really come up with a system that was going to be defensible and that was going to be as objective as possible and collect as much data as possible and really make sure we were being fair to all the vendors and to our users. And so for the second phase, we had 5 vendors that we were looking at. We spent about 5 to 10 hours on each of them. And if the vendor would give us a free license to use for a few months, we'd take it. If not, we'd pay for it. We wanted to get our hands on. We would go through training. We would upload. We had this test data set. It was about 5 gigs of data. We'd upload it to all the systems and we'd benchmark it. We'd see how long does it take to upload and process and get to a point to where we could start reviewing it. We would benchmark running productions. We would benchmark going from document to document and coding it and seeing how fast and responsive the system was. And throughout that process, we continued refining our software feature comparison, which ended up being a spreadsheet. And so we had this spreadsheet with all the vendors and 50 plus features, as well as corporate makeup and how long the company had been around. Pricing, all this stuff. We just threw it all into this massive spreadsheet. And then at the end of that second 3 months, that second phase, we eliminated 2 more and we were down to 3 finalists. So 3 Ediscovery software vendors that we were going to really put through their paces for the final phase. And I'll talk about that in a little bit later. But that was the beginning of our process for evaluating Ediscovery. And it's a process that we use to this day now for other systems. Like if we're evaluating time and billing systems or document management systems, we go through this process where we try to cast as wide a net as possible, do as much research as possible, talk to a lot of people, get a lot of hands-on, and make sure that we're going through as thorough a process as possible.
Cool. I bet you can run a master class on all of this now. Cool. Next question I have is for you, Mark. So it sounds like you were the sole person in charge of finding potential vendors and vetting their software. What was that process like, especially considering the fact that you didn't issue a formal RFP?
Yeah, I think our process bears some resemblance to what Rob just described, but it's kind of a miniature version because it was really just me at the time. So we did not issue a formal RFP. Rather, we started just surveying options. I started surveying options, mostly on Google to get a sense of what was out there, and frankly encountered some initial confusion right off the bat about the fact that some of those platforms have their own names, but they're functionally piggybacking off of relativity, or there's a lot of variation in the features and the costs of those providers, but that's not necessarily publicly disclosed, or it's not obvious from things you can just read on the web, what those features are and how they work across the platform. So that doesn't get you very far to just look at what you can find on websites. Once we had that list, I reached out to everybody to try to schedule meetings. I think it was around 8 of those. And the first thing I remember is a time-consuming process on both sides. And that's because the vendor is going to need to know how you want to use the platform in order to have a productive conversation with you. So sometimes that takes multiple meetings, and it really requires you, the law firm, to have in mind some specific use cases for what you care about, because these platforms are so multi-featured that they can do most things for most people, but you need to be able to assess what matters to you. So I kind of immediately was apparent talking to different vendors who had some understanding of what my law firm wanted out of an e-discovery platform. And that's not the technical details necessarily of what my specific practices, but rather what things are relevant to a plaintiff side class action law firm and what things aren't. So there are some platforms, Everlaw included, that have a pretty impressive set of privilege and redaction related tools that I'm sure are very useful for certain types of users, not really a priority for us. By contrast, there are things that sound minor, but that we care a lot about because of how we use our platform. So culling duplicate emails, searching for the most inclusive email threads, moving coding along faster. Those are relatively small things that matter a great deal to us. So you could see variation in the kind of detail and quality of the conversation that we were able to have based on whether those vendors understood how we would use the platform. And then the last kind of point of that process was trialing out the different platforms. And again, I was pretty surprised to find that it was around maybe half of those vendors that actually allowed me to do a real hands-off trial of the platform. That's something that I consider utterly necessary to make a smart judgment about what to use. So in instances where the only option available was to have a meeting and have a sales rep share their screen and perhaps I could instruct them about what to do, for me that was a major demerit as compared to Everlaw and some other platforms that they'll just set you up with a big workspace, a bunch of docs in there, and field your questions as you go. It's a big decision to choose something like this, and I spent quite a while kind of tooling around, trying out the various ways that I usually use Ediscovery platforms, and that resulted in me asking a bunch of questions over email to Everlaw's reps and the reps for other vendors. And again, you can see some kind of variation in the quality of the responses you got there. So that start to finish was really my process.
Awesome. Well, thank you for sharing. This next question is for you both, but Rob, I'll start with you. What's something you wish you'd known or paid more attention to when you were beginning the RFP process?
So I think if I could go back and tell my younger self, 7 years ago, how to approach it differently, I think we would have had more trust in the cloud. We had been using on-prem Ediscovery for almost 20 years, and we were really nervous about going to the cloud for this. And I think we were concerned about things like upload and download bottlenecks. When we're on-prem, the data's right there. We just transfer it to a server in a few minutes and it's done. We were worried about it taking hours to get the data up to the cloud system and then to download it from the cloud system after we had generated a production. We had some bad experiences in the past with cloud user interfaces where it just was not as full featured as you get with a desktop application. And we were concerned about reliability. We didn't want the cloud system to crash in the afternoon right before a critical deadline. And sure, our on-premises systems crashed all the time. Not all the time, but occasionally too. But at least for those systems, we were responsible for them, and we could do something about it if it crashed. And I was concerned about, if a cloud system crashed, we just basically had to sit on our hands and wait for some tech support team somewhere to resolve the issue for us. And so it was a little bit, we were nervous about that. And I was also nervous about pricing in the cloud. With on-premises systems, you pay the same amount every year, no matter whether it's 10 gigs of data or 2 terabytes of data. So you have a certain amount of predictability with what it's going to cost. But when you're using a cloud Ediscovery system, you're typically charged per gigabyte. And so we were concerned about what that was going to look like. What if we ended up getting a bunch of really huge, multi-terabyte projects? What was that going to cost? How are we going to pass it along to the client? How are we going to handle cost recovery? So we were concerned about a lot of those things, and ultimately it all ended up just being a nothing burger. It was just, it was not even, at this point today in 2024, we have 70 to 80% of our software in the cloud. And the cloud is where most innovation is happening. It's where the best systems are nowadays. And so I feel that because we spent a lot of time evaluating on-prem systems back then, we kind of wasted that time. And I just wish that we could have just focused 100% on cloud e-discovery systems, and that would have made the process a little bit more efficient.
Got it. Now, Mark, same question for you. What's something you wish you'd known or paid more attention to when you were beginning the whole process?
Yeah, I think on the theme of trying to have your RFP process be an efficient one, what I learned over the course of it is the importance of talking to your users in advance about their pain points and about what has frustrated them about their prior e-discovery experiences. I think over the course of a somewhat lengthy process, I learned a lot about that by running things that I learned by the other attorneys that I work with here. But in retrospect, I think before talking to any e-discovery vendor, I wish I had sat down, even for 10, 15 minutes, with each of the folks here and asked about what is irritating to them in e-discovery, or what they wish they could do that they couldn't, so that I could bring those specific concerns with me to those conversations. Because, like I said, the quality of the conversation, what you're learning by talking to a vendor, is defined in large part by whether you can ask intelligent questions and whether the vendor is informed about what you're going to use. So rather than doing that on the back end, I think I would have tried to do it more on the front end.
Got it. Thank you. So now my next question is also for you both, but Rob, I'll start with you. What evaluation criteria did you outline either in the RFP or when you were initiating contact with potential vendors?
Yeah, we had a lot of evaluation criteria, and they were kind of in different categories. So we had major features that we had to have. So for example, we had to have some type of TAR 3.0 review capability. We didn't have that in our previous system, and we knew that we were getting into larger and larger projects where it's impossible to get eyes on every single document. So we knew we had to have some type of machine learning or some capability to assist with review using more advanced technology. And so that was a critical one. We knew we had to have some way of handling large review assignment batching. We were getting into cases where we would have 10 to 15, even as many as 30 attorneys working on and reviewing documents in a project, including sometimes attorneys co-counsel from other law firms. And so we needed some way of supervising and managing that process, and being able to assign batches to people or self-assign, being able to do some type of quality control throughout that process. So it had to have a really good system for that. For example, we wanted the ability for us to import pre-processed documents on our own. So if a production came in from a different counsel with a load file, we didn't want to have to send it up to some tech support or help desk somewhere and wait for them to import it, especially if it came in over the weekend or at night. We wanted to be able to do as much, if not everything, on our own as possible. We didn't want to have any gatekeepers or anything that was in the way of us doing certain things like that. And we wanted a system that was fast. We wanted a system that was secure. So those are some of the major features, but we also had minor features that we cared about, including things like native Excel redacting or support for word track changes or redlining, multiple monitor support, a much better way of handling privileged documents. We wanted to be able to produce placeholders for privileged documents where we reserve the Bates range and then be able to unprivilege or claw them back, which a lot of systems didn't have that capability back then. And even really minor esoteric features, like we did not want, when you imported emails into the system, we did not want the inline images to be extracted as a separate attachment. Our old system did that, and it seems like several other systems did that. And so it created this scenario where you had like a quarter of your database was just the same logo images over and over again from everyone's signature blocks. And so we just want to make sure little things like that, even as minor as that, were addressed in whatever new system. And there are also just amorphous features that we didn't really know what they look like until we saw it. But we wanted a really intuitive user experience. We wanted some kind of refreshing, innovative, new way of visualizing email threading. We just weren't happy with anything we had seen up to that point. And so that's just kind of a sampling of the features that we cared about and that we communicated to our vendors early on that were kind of essential for us as part of this evaluation.
So in hindsight, all those features may sound minor, but like when you're an attorney, or you're on the team like working through it, that can get really, really annoying, I'm sure. So in
Mm-hmm.
hindsight, it's minor, but
Definitely.
it definitely makes a difference. So Mark, how about you? What was your evaluation criteria when you were initiating contact with potential vendors?
Yeah, I'll try and add a few that I can to what Rob covered. So, for the work that we do, most of our interaction with the Ediscovery platform is review and coding, and so that's the heightened importance for us. So, a lot of minor criteria that end up being kind of major when you have to do them 1,000 times, being able to view documents natively, native documents directly on the platform as opposed to having to download them. That was a point of differentiation between certain vendors. Deduplicating documents in a way that is comprehensible and effective. Like keyboard shortcuts for coding documents more quickly, for moving back and forth between documents, for doing the different kinds of coding that you do. The kind of features and smoothness of the annotation methods that allow us, the reviewing attorney, to be able to communicate their thoughts to someone later in time who's reviewing that document subsequently. Those are all small things. And then other criteria, the other bucket I have is cost, which is more complicated than I understood at the outset. So obviously there's whatever the kind of global pricing model is for the platform, but there's also what's the cost for cold storage and how much can you save during for us at least, significant periods where you have documents stored that way. Are you going to be charged for support? Some folks I talked to were charging hourly rates or per request rates that would have added up a lot based on how much we've used Everlaw support.
That's training.
Yeah, right. And then the last one I think is providing access to outside parties for free. It's been nice to not feel constricted as far as who we share documents with, whether that's co-counsel or experts, and instead to do that whenever it's convenient for us. So those kind of dual buckets of reviewing coding and cost were the main criteria for us.
Awesome. Well, thank you for sharing. Um, Rob, now one of the evaluation criteria that you mentioned to us internally previously was the need for someone like at the firm to be able to use the software platform while on their iPad on the beach. Can you offer more insight into this idea and how important that ability is for your team?
Yeah, sure. So I think it kind of started off as a joke, but we had a partner who he likes to take vacations with his family. And he's one of our, pretty big litigators who bills a lot and always tries to get in his hours. And he had been using our old system on a vacation, and he was trying to do a document review, and it was very frustrating. He had an older Dell laptop that barely, the screen maybe could do 200 lumens, and so he could barely see it in the sun. And there was no Wi-Fi, and so he had to hotspot onto his phone so he could get a network connection. And then he had to VPN into our system, and then he had to launch Citrix and launch the old Ediscovery system. And it was just very, very unreliable and clunky for him to do that. And he was on a beach. He was trying to get some work done, and he was just not happy with our old system, the way it handled that. And so he just said to me when we were going through this evaluation, he said to me kind of as an aside, he goes, "Look, I don't care, what other features we have. All that matters to me is that I can do a document review on my iPad on a beach while I'm on vacation. And so if you can make that happen, then I'll be happy." And so, we didn't put that exact thing on our criteria, but we did include things like it has to have it has to have tablet support. We have to be able to use this system on a tablet, and it has to have a user interface that is conducive to touch. And so that made it into our evaluation criteria. And that was part of when we were evaluating our systems, we would actually try to launch them and run them and view documents and do some kind of mini document review on an iPad to see how the system worked. And so then we ended up, choosing Everlaw, which I'll get to our final phase of our process soon. And so we migrated to Everlaw in 2018. And a few years later, that same partner texted me out of the blue. It was like 2021. He just texted me and he goes, "Hey, Rob, I'm on vacation. I'm on a beach in Hawaii right now. And guess what? I'm reviewing documents on Everlaw on my iPad." And so he said, "Good job." And so, that kind of gave me a lot of insight into our attorneys and what they want to do on their vacations. But it ended up being a thing that we actually do incorporate into our evaluation criteria for new software moving forward is does it work on, we want to be a little bit more device agnostic moving forward. And will it work on an iPad? Will it work on a Surface? Can you even get a little bit of work done if all you have is your phone? And so we look at that when we're evaluating software moving forward. And so that's a component of our evaluation criteria.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Like, even some of these litigators that are like running in and out of airports, they just want the ability to quickly like look something up if they have to. So that all makes sense. But I hope that
Exactly.
partner was able to enjoy their vacation.
I hope he did spend some time with his family, but
Cool. All right, thank you for that. Well, Mark, this next one's for you. Since Engstrom Lee is a plaintiff's firm, were there any additional functionalities or capabilities you were looking for in an Ediscovery software platform that are specific to the plaintiff side?
Yeah, I'll try to name a couple of things that haven't come up already. So one is the ease with which you can modify the coding panel, kind of distinct from how fast that goes or what options are there. The prior platform we were using, that required either a very sophisticated attorney to do it, or more often the e-discovery specialist at the law firm. And so there was a lag anytime an attorney decided that they wanted to change what options were available, what codes, how they were laid out, etc., between knowing that should happen and having it actually happen. So that means your coding documents, knowing that you're missing the codes that you wish to apply, or that things aren't quite laid out right. Maybe you have to go back and redo that work some other time. So having a system that is intuitive for a non-expert attorney to manipulate on the go is critical for us, because that our understanding of cases is changing pretty regularly when we're reviewing documents, especially at the outset of the case. Getting that right makes our review and coding a lot more accurate. A second smaller one is just searching for only the most inclusive emails from threads, which is another pain point. That's much simpler now. It can be done by attorneys, and it saves a lot of time. And then the last one that comes to mind is Everlaw's Story Builder feature. We didn't know about that at the outset, and I didn't know what specific features were there, but that's been critical for us for the kind of collaboration. So maybe it's one or two attorneys doing the actual document review, but eventually there's going to be a meeting or a series of them where we need to communicate that knowledge to the rest of the attorneys on the team. And Story Builders allowed us to do that, I think, in the way it's designed, and perhaps even in some ways that it wasn't. So, for example, we'll take a Word document full of Bates numbers and short descriptions of what documents are about, and toss that into Story Builder, and it'll convert that document into links, hyperlinks to the Bates numbers to the actual documents. And again, we use that in partner meetings here to talk through critical documents. It makes it all faster and a lot simpler to work through that stuff.
Great. Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned Story Builder, because I work with other plaintiff firms as well, and Story Builder is a big deal. Cool. Well, thank you for sharing that. So again, this next question is for the both of you, but Rob, I'll start with you again. What led you to ultimately choose Everlaw as your e-discovery software platform?
So I'll go back to our process. And so, as I mentioned, we had a three-phase process, which ended up taking 9 months. And so I covered the first two phases where we whittled it down from 10 vendors to 5 and then to 3. And so as we went into that final 3 months of our evaluation, we had our 3 finalists. There were our 3 software vendors that we were really going to put through their paces to figure out which one was going to be the one we chose. And so for that final phase, we probably spent at least 20 hours on each of those 3 systems, really, getting hands-on, really, just completely putting them through their paces. And we also brought in our power users. And so we had our litigation paralegals and attorneys who were our heavy e-discovery users. And so we got them up to speed. We had a meeting with them, explain the process up to that point. We had them all attend demos of the 3 remaining systems. And so that way they could actually see the systems for their own. They could provide their own feedback. I could get a better sense of what features they considered were important and what they liked about those 3 systems. And then we actually, in a couple scenarios, we actually used those power users to do a real document review. So this was with a real client, real data that was loaded into one of these evaluation systems. We had the users go through training. They did a real document review, and then we did a real production that ended up going out the door to opposing counsel. And so, it was a little risky, but we still had a backup. We would still load the data into our existing system at the time, just in case. And we tended to do things that didn't have a mission critical deadline, just in case we had to fall back to our original system. But we wanted our power users to get their hands on as much as possible with these systems and use it for a real scenario. And we also kind of wanted to break the systems, or at least, if they had bugs, we wanted to uncover them. And we wanted to be able to contact tech support for those systems and see what that experience was like. See how quickly they resolve the issue and what their responsiveness is like and whether they could or not. And so that was critical as well. And throughout this whole process, we continued refining our software feature evaluation matrix, our spreadsheet, and we really delved into a lot of those features. And so it wasn't enough to just know, okay, this system does email threading, does the other system do it too, and just kind of check off a box. We wanted to actually see how the other systems implemented it. We would set up entire meetings just to talk about how do you do email threading? What does it look like? And at the end of this process, we invited all of our power users together into a meeting and also got a lot of feedback over email and just got a sense of what they liked. We used our, what systems they appreciated the most. We used our spreadsheet as sort of an objective way to actually look at the columns and see, which vendor is scoring better on a lot of these features compared to the others and which vendor has the least deficits. And then we went to our executive leadership and we made our final recommendation. And so that was our process. It was a long process. It took, most of a year, but in the end, I think it went through a lot of the steps that were essential. It was defensible. It was something where if anyone came in down the road and said, why did you choose Everlaw? We could say, we spent 9 months and a couple hundred hours making this decision. It wasn't arbitrary, and this was our process. And so, in the end, I think it was a good process, and it led to the right solution.
That's awesome. Mark, how about you? What led you to ultimately choose Everlaw as your software platform for e-discovery? And did you have a massive spreadsheet like Rob and his team did?
In many ways, Rob's RFP is kind of the Rolls Royce to my Toyota Honda Civic or something. But yes, we did share also a massive spreadsheet, and it's not just a joke. It really was a critical thing for me in assessing features across the board. And I would, tag a feature as green for whichever provider did best there, and the kind of color told the story by the end of the day. So both in assessing it at the end of the day, the spreadsheet helps, and in keeping track of new features you weren't aware of at the start of the process, kind of adding to it. So, you know, in miniature, we did similarly to what Rob did, where I spent a lot of time trialing software, reviewing document sets, annotating, coding, doing all the things that we're going to do, and held meetings with my partners about my takeaways from that, had certain partners do their own trials, and ended up being not a super close call at the end of the day. I think the things that ultimately led us to choose Everlaw were, you could try to generalize. There was a sense that Everlaw was working hard at creating a better e-discovery experience in an iterative way that involved listening to its users, which was very different from what we had experienced in the past with different vendors. So there are monthly updates from Everlaw. Much of the time, there's something in those updates that we care about. On the flip side, there's a process to submit feature requests to Everlaw. That's something that we've done regularly in our couple years there to good effect. Kind of relatedly, we felt confident by the end of the process in the support that we were going to receive from Everlaw. I've talked about how it was important for us to do as much as possible without support to make sure that you can keep the trains running and kind of manage it without an expert. But you're going to run into that occasionally, and that's been invaluable for us to get an email back the same day from someone from Everlaw to solve a minor problem, but one that's holding up what we need to do. And then finally, I would just say again, the speed with which you can move productions. I fortunately did not have to make this decision, but if there was one platform that moved me through my documents, obviously faster than all the others, I don't know what features I would be willing to give up for that, but many. So that was critical to all the attorneys' acceptance of moving to Everlaw.
Well,
I was
thank you.
just going to add on to what Mark said, in that the innovation, the ability for the company to innovate was a critical thing too, because we had been coming from a system that we had used for almost a decade where they barely ever innovated, and there was maybe one new major version that came out in those years, and it just fixed bugs and barely added any new functionality. And during the 9 months that we were actively evaluating Everlaw, they came up with numerous new features, and I think they had even I had mentioned something in passing earlier on about being able to do something. I think it was being able to import Bates numbered documents without a load file and still having the Bates numbers actually mapped to the Bates fields. And they implemented that feature before the end of our evaluation. And so it was something that I was able to see in person how responsive they were to their customers and how quickly they could innovate with a new feature. And also, our spreadsheet did have color coding, and we had green for good features and kind of reddish pink for deficits. So we were able to see visually on the spreadsheet, which vendor just looked better just from the color scheming. So I definitely agree with using colors in your spreadsheet.
I have a feeling a lot of the people that will be tuning in are going to be asking you both for copies of the spreadsheets.
Sure.
I suppose. Um, well, okay. So moving on, Rob, with over 60 attorneys, in addition to paralegals and support staff, McDonald Carano has a lot of potential e-discovery software users. Once you narrowed down your list of vendors and selected Everlaw, how did you go about getting buy-in from your team members?
Well, buy-in was actually ended up being the easy part, which is not always the case when we're implementing new software. But because in this case we had involved our power user litigation attorneys and paralegals during the last phase of our evaluation, the majority of our heaviest e-discovery users were already on board. They'd already used Everlaw, or at least seen it, had generally positive opinion about it. And it also helped that our tech committee chairperson was a partner who was a power user litigator. And he was one of the ones who actually test drove Everlaw with a real project. And so getting him on board was essential. Getting a lot of our major power users in Ediscovery on board just during the evaluation phase, that was essential. And so by the time we actually chose Everlaw and were rolling it out, we already had, probably 60 to 70% of our actual people who are using Ediscovery on a daily or weekly basis. They were already on board with it. And it also helped that no one was happy with the old system. They were so frustrated with it. Just its speed and lack of functionality and the various pain points I've already described. And so it created a scenario where people were ready. They were wondering why it was taking so long. Why are you doing this whole 9-month thing? Can't you just make a choice and get us a new system ASAP? Because we need to get off of this old system. And we had a partner who very early on had a big project coming up that was going to have a lot of documents, and he was real excited to use predictive coding, and he had a large team behind him. And so all of this stuff just collected together and made it so that when we finally made the decision to use Everlaw, people were eager and excited to start migrating over and to start using the new system right away. And so I think, to make the buy-in process as easy as possible, it's important to involve not only your power users, but whoever your influencers are in the company. Get them on board with it, and that way it'll ease the process of rolling it out to the firm, because it creates that necessary momentum when you already have a lot of the critical people excited and on board with using it right away.
Great, thank you. Mark, since you were just a team of one, how did you go about getting buy-in from other members at your firm, at Engstrom Lee, once you decided Everlaw was the front runner?
Yeah, I think ours was a sort of unique situation in that we were choosing an e-discovery vendor at the outset of the law firm. And so there was less kind of pressure or relationship to some pre-existing vendor. I was chosen to kind of run this project because I am known for my enthusiasm about the details of e-discovery. So I think, frankly, there wasn't going to be a lot of dissent about whatever I recommended at the end of the process, which was a thorough one. Probably the more salient thing was making sure that people were actually going to buy in and using the platform, and not just kind of literally using it, but using it to its full effect. So there was some salesmanship there in, again, probably referencing that spreadsheet to point out specific ways in which this platform would be better than what people were used to. It could save them time, really, is the actual hook that gets people listening. So whether that's being able to push documents out to an expert faster, intuitively coding things faster. Predictive coding is one that previously felt inaccessible to almost everyone, and now is fairly intuitive enough that people here are taking the initiative to use it. So it was walking through what I felt I had learned about real improvements on features that we previously didn't have or had that didn't work very well, and pitching the folks that I work with about why they should actually take advantage of those things in the future. So that was the main thing. And then I think the other part is the support that Everlaw offers was a nice pitch to the other lawyers here, in that it's sort of a backstop. Like, even if I'm wrong, that this stuff will all work smoothly all the time and we can figure it out, knowing that we have a responsive company that is willing to walk us through things so we can develop best practices in the future was meaningful.
Great. Well, thank you for sharing. What advice, and Rob, I'll start with you again. What advice would you have to those just getting started in their own RFP process?
Sure. So I would say it all depends on your resources and the amount of time you have to spend. But I would recommend putting in the time, really, casting as wide a net as possible, doing your research, learning who the players are, and trying to see as many, at least see demos of as many systems as you can early on, so that you can get a sense of, what innovation is happening in that space, what the current features are, what it is that's going to be important to you as you do this evaluation. And then I really think it's important to enumerate the features that are important to you. Make a spreadsheet, or at least make a list or a Word document, and go through that list and see, get feedback from your users, see what's important to them, and then really compare your software vendors against that list. And again, don't just check items off a list. If a company says that they have this one feature, like say they do predictive coding, or some kind of TAR 3.0, don't just say, okay, you have the feature, check it off the list. Actually see a demo of that one feature, learn how that feature works, try to get hands-on with that feature, and see how the implementation of it really compares across the other companies that you're looking at. Because I think that's where it's that level of detail where a lot of times if you just check off boxes and then make a decision and end up going with a software vendor, and then you find out a few months later, the way they actually implement this feature that they said they have is not very thorough, it's clunky, it's not very intuitive. I really wish we had spent a lot more time on that one feature. And so I know it's time consuming, but really going through all the important features that you have and making sure that each system approaches those features exactly the way you want. And then the final thing I would say is involve your power users, your influencers, and your stakeholders throughout the process. At least keep them informed, via regular email updates. But I would take it a step further. I would invite them to demos. I would try to get any time that you can actually get them to have hands on the software. That's important. If you're willing to risk it toward the end, use real users with real data on a real project and a real deadline. Get those users' feedback. Even bring it to a vote. Make it democratic, and so that you can see, okay, where are they leaning? What does everyone think? And so that way, you've already done some of the buy-in work, even during the evaluation process, because you've gotten your power users on board with it. And then when you actually, sign the contract and start rolling out the software, it's a part of that buy-in process is already taken care of, and you just have to, and you have people that are hopefully excited about the new program, and eager to roll up their sleeves and start using it. And so that's how I would approach it. Just really spend the time to evaluate the systems at a deep level. Make a spreadsheet or at least a list, and involve your power users, and that'll make the process pretty bulletproof.
Mark, how about you? Do you have any advice?
I think Rob's answer there is so thorough and accurate that I don't have that much to add to it. One thing I just underline is what Rob was saying about actually understanding how features are implemented, because it just makes all the difference. A Ediscovery platform is no more good than how people actually use it. Whatever video they have online about how something is meant to work is not useful to me if nobody cares to actually do that. So understanding the engagement level that you're likely to receive from the people using the platform, and whether the features as implemented are likely to be used by them, is super important. The other thing I'd say is maybe to come in with less preconceptions about what the right platform looks like than I had at the start. So Everlaw ended up being our choice. Probably my second choice was a platform that was way down on the feature set. But as we were choosing, we were a new firm with pretty limited resources to spend at that point. This is something that was quite cheap, but it did all the absolutely critical things quite well. It lacked a lot of bells and whistles that I've come to appreciate, but some bells and whistles that were available from some of the fancier platforms, but not actually useful in the way that they laid them out. So I think keeping an open mind about what your ultimate choice will look like, and that the fact that you can execute features well or less well is going to be meaningful, and a company that has things that you don't care about or won't use is ultimately not of use to you.
Yeah, I definitely agree with having an open mind because I think when we first started looking at Everlaw, the initial home screen with the Kanban style cards was highly unusual to us. It wasn't something that we had ever seen in any other e-discovery system, and so I wasn't sure how I was going to take to that feature and how our users were. But it ended up being a really good way to approach it, and our users have really gotten used to it, and I really like a lot of other Kanban style project management systems now too, and so that was something that I think at first was kind of like, okay, that's kind of odd, but yeah, having that open mind I think is essential to the process.
Great. Awesome. Well, thank you. And that wraps up our questions. And thank you so much, Rob. Thank you so much, Mark, for joining. Thank you to everyone who attended for listening and ASEDS for hosting. Any questions that anyone has, feel free to reach out directly to myself, to Rob, or Mark. Best of luck on your next RFP. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. Thank you, Sophia. Thank you, Mark. Yay. Cool. Thank you.
Good.
Yeah, this was
That's great.
We have sort of adversarial relationships with some of our vendors, and the Everlaw, I think, like sent us hats that people wear because they are just adored.
Yeah, no, I love it when we send usually some really challenging, unique situation to Everlaw support, and we think they're just going to tell us to take a hike. There's no way we can do this, and then they'll come back with some innovative workaround, with screenshots, and I'm like, whoa, pretty cool. So yeah, always been impressed by Everlaw support. Ever Okay, good.
Sure. Everlaw helps me to review and organize my documents in a way that allows me to make smart litigation decisions in collaboration with my team.
And I would say that Everlaw just makes my life easier and stress-free by trusting that our e-discovery projects are handled in an innovative system that is very speedy and has some of the most advanced features that are available in the e-discovery space.
I was very surprised at the difficulty of obtaining a hands-off trial of various platforms. It's not an issue that I had with Everlaw, but I consider it just an absolutely necessary component of any informed review. And speaking for myself, I am suspicious of any platform that doesn't let me tool around as long as I want, doing the tests that I want to perform to get comfortable with it.
And I was just completely blown away and amazed by how innovative the company was, how quickly they could adapt and build new features, and how they could make certain things work in a cloud user interface that I didn't even know were possible at the time. And so I was, my mind was completely open to the possibilities of cloud and the capability for innovation in cloud discovery.
I'm a broken record on this. The speed with which you can review documents is absolutely critical. I haven't seen a system that works faster than Everlaw, and if I knew of one that did, it would be hard to defend using something else. So just moving through the documents that I need to move through as fast as possible.
And for us, I think it was email threading. I was completely amazed by the approach to email threading. It was visual, it was graphical, it showed the hierarchy of emails, and it allowed you to say you had a 30 emails read, you could review that in one fell swoop. It was a way that it was a system that was really well conceptualized and visualized. I was very impressed. Sure. Sure.
Motif.
Okay. Sounds good. Okay.
Yeah,
Cool.
thanks for both.
Thank you.
Rob, it's always a pleasure to chat with you. Mark, it was a pleasure to meet you. I work
Likewise.
very closely with plaintiff firms as well, so I might be picking your brain on something in the future if you don't mind.
Feel free.
Thank you.